And if I told you that some of the biggest upsets in UFC history might not have been upsets at all, that behind the octagon, behind the blood and sweat, there's a shadowy world of suspicious betting patterns, last-minute odds shifts, and fighters who suddenly lose in ways that make absolutely no sense? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change the way you watch MMA forever. Before we dive deep, let me give you 3 facts that should make you pause. First, in 2023 alone, there were over 40 UFC fights where betting companies froze the lines because of irregular betting activity. 40 fights. That's not normal. Second, there's a specific pattern that keeps repeating. Unknown fighters on the undercards suddenly get massive bets placed on them hours before the fight, and then they win by decision or their opponent mysteriously underperforms. Third, and this is the kicker, multiple state athletic commissions have launched quiet investigations into UFC betting irregularities. But you won't see Dana White talking about any of this in press conferences. So what's really going on? Are UFC fights actually being manipulated? And if so, who's behind it, and why hasn't this blown up into a massive scandal? Let's start with the basics and work our way up to the stuff that'll blow your mind. To understand why this matters, you need to know how betting on UFC works and why it's different from other sports. When you bet on a football game or a basketball match, you're dealing with teams. Multiple players, coaches, referees, and so many moving parts that fixing a game becomes incredibly difficult. You'd need to coordinate with dozens of people, and the more people involved, the higher the chance someone talks. But MMA? It's different, dangerously different. In a UFC fight, you only have 2 people in that octagon. Just 2. If you wanted to influence the outcome, you theoretically only need to get to 1 person. One fighter decides to underperform, take a dive, or just not fight at their best, and boom, the outcome changes. Here's how the betting works. You've got your main bets, the money line, where you pick who wins. Then you've got prop bets on how they win, what round it ends, whether it goes to decision, all of that. The UFC has become one of the most heavily bet on sports in the world, with billions of dollars changing hands every single year. Now here's where it gets interesting. Bookmakers set odds based on tons of factors: fighter records, recent performance, injuries, and even social media activity. When you see a fighter listed at -300, that means the bookies think they're heavily favored. Plus 250 means they're the underdog. But sometimes these odds shift dramatically right before a fight. And we are not talking about a small shift because someone tweeted they had a good training camp. We are not talking about massive swings that indicate huge amounts of money being placed on one specific outcome. This is where the red flags start waving. Let me walk you through what a suspicious betting pattern looks like, using real examples without naming specific fighters to avoid legal issues. There was a fight in 2022, lower card, 2 fighters most casual fans had never heard of. Fighter A was a -180 favorite. Decent odds, nothing crazy. Then about 6 hours before the fight, something strange happened. Massive bets started flooding in on Fighter B, the underdog. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars within a 2-hour window. The odds flipped completely. By fight time, Fighter B was suddenly the favorite. What happened in the fight? Fighter A looked slow, unmotivated, got taken down easily, and lost a unanimous decision. Nothing obviously suspicious in the fight itself, but Fighter A just didn't look like the same person who'd been dominating opponents months earlier. Coincidence? Maybe. But here's the thing. This exact pattern has happened over and over again. The problem is proving anything. A fighter having an off night is normal. Fighters deal with injuries they don't disclose, personal issues, bad weight cuts, you name it. There are a million legitimate reasons why someone might underperform. But when you see the same pattern repeatedly, when you see betting lines move in ways that don't match any logical analysis, when you see fighters lose in styles that completely contradict their training in previous fights, you start to wonder. Several betting integrity services, the companies that monitor for suspicious activity, have flagged UFC fights more than any other combat sport. More than boxing, more than kickboxing, the UFC. And here's something most people don't know. Betting companies have actually voided bets on UFC fights due to suspected manipulation. They've literally said, something's not right here. We're not paying out on this. That's massive. Bookies don't give money back unless something is seriously wrong. Now we need to talk about why UFC is particularly vulnerable compared to other American sports. The NFL, NBA, and MLB are all heavily regulated. There are strict protocols, investigations, and the leagues themselves have entire departments dedicated to integrity. Plus, these are team sports with massive public scrutiny. But the UFC, it's a global organization with fighters from everywhere, fighting all over the world. Events happen in Las Vegas, Abu Dhabi, London, Sydney, Brazil, you name it. Here's the problem. Betting regulations vary wildly from country to country. In some places, betting is heavily monitored. In others, it's barely regulated at all. This creates opportunities for people who know how to exploit the system. There are certain countries where you can place enormous bets on UFC fights with almost no oversight. If you wanted to manipulate a fight and place bets to profit from it, you'd route your money through these jurisdictions where nobody's really watching too closely. And unlike traditional sports betting, where you're usually dealing with licensed bookmakers in regulated markets, UFC betting happens on offshore sites, cryptocurrency platforms, and underground networks that are nearly impossible to trace. The UFC itself has limited ability to monitor this. They can see when betting lines move strangely, but they can't track who's placing the bets or where the money's coming from. That's not their jurisdiction. Multiple reports from gambling watchdog organizations have pointed this out. The international nature of the UFC makes it uniquely susceptible to betting manipulation compared to domestic sports leagues. Let's talk about the fighters themselves because this is where things get really complicated. UFC fighters, especially those not in the top 10 rankings, don't make as much money as you'd think. The median UFC fighter might make $30,000 to $50,000 per fight after expenses. That's their entire income for months of brutal training. Meanwhile, they're one injury away from losing everything. No guaranteed contracts like other sports, limited health coverage, and a career that could end with one bad knockout. Now let's say someone approaches a fighter who's on a losing streak, maybe about to be cut from the organization. They offer them a significant amount of money, more than they'd make from winning their next fight, just to underperform or lose in a specific way. I'm not saying this happens, but the economic pressure on lower card fighters is real. The temptation exists. Former fighters have hinted at this in interviews, though nobody wants to go on record with specifics. One retired fighter said in a podcast that he'd been approached twice during his career by people wanting to talk about opportunities related to betting. He didn't elaborate, but the implication was clear. The UFC has a code of conduct that prohibits fighters from betting on their own fights or any UFC event, but enforcement is difficult. How do you stop a fighter from having their cousin in another country place bets on their behalf? And here's another angle. Cornermen, training partners, even managers have information that could be valuable to bettors. They know if a fighter is injured, if their head isn't in the game, if something's going wrong in training camp. This insider information is gold in the betting world. So what concrete evidence actually exists? Let's look at what we know for sure. In 2023, the Nevada State Athletic Commission launched an investigation into betting irregularities surrounding several UFC fights. They interviewed fighters, examined betting data, and worked with gambling integrity units. The investigation is ongoing, and no public results have been released. But the fact that it exists tells you something. The Canadian Gaming Association flagged a UFC fight in 2022 where betting patterns were so suspicious that they recommended further investigation. The report noted that millions of dollars were bet on a specific outcome just hours before the fight, with the money coming from sources that couldn't be easily verified. In Australia, betting companies actually suspended wagering on a UFC fight mid-event because of what they called informed betting, which is industry code for someone knows something we don't. Multiple data analysis firms that track betting across sports have identified UFC as having the highest rate of anomalous betting patterns of any major sport. These are patterns that don't match typical bettor behavior and suggest either insider information or manipulation. But here's the frustrating part. None of this has led to any major consequences. No fighters have been banned, no massive scandal has erupted, no congressional hearings or anything like that. Why? Part of it is proof. It's incredibly hard to prove someone deliberately lost a fight versus just having a bad night. Part of it is jurisdiction, with international betting being so hard to regulate. And part of it might be that major stakeholders don't want this to become a bigger story. Here's something interesting. Dana White, who usually has an opinion on everything, goes silent when asked about betting irregularities. In press conferences where journalists have brought up suspicious betting patterns, Dana either deflects by saying the UFC takes integrity seriously or just doesn't answer the question directly. For someone who's usually so outspoken, this silence is notable. The UFC's official position is that they work with athletic commissions and betting integrity services to monitor for suspicious activity. They've implemented some measures, like requiring fighters to report any contact from suspicious individuals and educating fighters about betting rules. But critics argue this isn't enough. Other major sports leagues have much more robust integrity programs, with full-time staff dedicated to monitoring betting, partnerships with law enforcement, and severe penalties for violations. Some analysts have suggested that the UFC doesn't want to dig too deep because what they might find could damage the sport's reputation. If it came out that even a small percentage of fights were compromised, it could devastate fan trust and hurt the bottom line. The UFC is trying to position itself as a mainstream sport, getting deals with major networks, expanding globally, and maybe even angling for Olympic inclusion someday. A major betting scandal would set all of that back significantly. Let's zoom out and look at why this matters beyond just UFC. Sports betting is exploding in America. It's now legal in most states, and the industry is worth over $100 billion annually. Companies are spending millions on advertising, making it easier than ever to bet on sports through apps on your phone. With this explosion in legal betting comes increased opportunity for corruption. The more money flowing through the system, the higher the incentive to manipulate outcomes. MMA and UFC are particularly vulnerable because they're still relatively new to mainstream sports betting compared to football or basketball. The infrastructure and regulations haven't fully caught up to the reality of how much money is now involved. There's also a technology angle. With cryptocurrency and anonymous betting platforms, it's become easier to place large bets without leaving traditional paper trails. Law enforcement and regulatory bodies are struggling to keep up. Some countries have much stricter rules. The United Kingdom, for example, bans all athletes from betting on their own sport entirely, not just their own competitions. The penalties are severe, and they actually enforce these rules. The US could learn from this approach. The ultimate issue is that combat sports have always existed in a slightly shadowy space. Boxing has dealt with fixed fights and corruption for over a century. MMA is trying to be different, trying to be legitimate, but it's fighting against the same forces and economic incentives that have plagued boxing. Here's the hard truth. We'll probably never know the full extent of any manipulation in UFC betting. The nature of the sport makes it almost impossible to definitively prove most cases. But that doesn't mean we should ignore the warning signs or pretend everything is fine. The evidence of suspicious patterns is there. The vulnerability exists. The financial incentives are real. Most UFC fights are almost certainly legitimate. The vast majority of fighters are honest competitors who would never compromise their integrity. But even if it's only 1% of fights, even if it's a handful of cases per year, that's still a problem that needs to be addressed. The fans deserve to know they're watching real competition. The honest fighters deserve to know they're competing on a level playing field. And the sport itself deserves protection from the criminal elements that would exploit it for profit. If you found this video eye-opening, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind the sports we love. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Are you worried about betting integrity in UFC? Have you noticed suspicious patterns in fights?